world's biggest pop star, Michael Jackson. On June 25th, 2009, the entire world literally stopped when the news broke that the king of pop had passed away at just 50 years old. And for the past 15 years, the questions haven't stopped swirling. Was it just a terrible accident? Was it gross medical negligence? Or was it something darker? Well, by methodically analyzing the timeline, the medical data, and the historical context from our sources, we're going to reconstruct the exact sequence of events that led to his death. Let's get into it. To get to the bottom of this, we'll be moving through our investigation map. We're going to cover the tragic final night, the origins of the pain, childhood trauma and scars, the Neverland Ranch allegations, and finally, fatal medical negligence. So let's start with part 1. The tragic final night, June 24th to the 25th, 2009. Okay, so picture this. Michael had just wrapped up a grueling rehearsal at the Staples Center for his massive comeback tour. The guy was desperate for rest. If we look at the timeline, at 12:30 a.m., he arrives at his rented home in LA, has some dinner prepared by his chef, and tries to go to bed. But Michael suffered from absolutely severe insomnia. By 1:30 a.m., his personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, who was hired specifically for this tour, starts pumping him with sedatives, diazepam, lorazepam, midazolam, but nothing is working. For 8 to 10 agonizing hours, Michael is just wide awake. Finally, at 10:40 in the morning, at Michael's desperate pleading, Dr. Murray gives him 25 milligrams of a drug Michael called his milk, diluted with lidocaine. Fast forward to 12:15 p.m., and Dr. Murray suddenly realizes Michael is unresponsive. Panic completely takes over, security gets involved, and a 911 call is finally placed at 12:20 p.m. But it was too late. By 2:30 p.m. at the UCLA Medical Center, Michael Jackson was declared dead. Now, the absolutely crucial piece of this puzzle is understanding the specific drug we're talking about here, propofol. Listen, this is not some over-the-counter sleep gummy. This is a highly powerful intravenous anesthetic. It has a milky white color, which is exactly why Michael called it his milk, but its purpose is to put you into a full-blown surgical coma, completely wiping out your conscious mind. It's strictly meant to be used by trained anesthesiologists right before or during a surgery. It is absolutely 100% inappropriate to use as a nightly sleep aid in a residential bedroom. And honestly, nothing captures the sheer incompetence and absolute chaos of that morning better than this moment. When Dr. Murray found Michael unresponsive, he didn't just grab his phone and dial 911. No. Instead, he called Michael's assistant, who wasn't even at the house, who then had to call the security guard, Alberto Alvarez. It was Alvarez who finally made the call to 911. The operator immediately tells them, he's on the bed, let's get him on the floor so they can properly do CPR. I mean, this is basic, day 1 emergency protocol, and Dr. Murray was completely botching it. Which brings us to part 2, origins of the pain and a body breaking down. We really have to hit pause here and ask ourselves, how in the world does the greatest entertainer on the planet get to a point where he needs literal surgical anesthesia just to catch a few hours of sleep? Well, it traces back to a terrifying domino effect of physical trauma. Step 1. Back in 1984, during a Pepsi commercial shoot, a pyrotechnic stunt went horribly wrong. A spark landed in Michael's hair, giving him horrific third-degree burns all over his scalp. Then, step 2. In 1999, during a massive show in Germany, a mechanical bridge he was standing on completely snapped, plunging him 50 feet down into the stage pit. The guy literally finished the song in sheer agony before going to the hospital. These 2 catastrophic physical incidents kicked off a lifelong reliance on painkillers, which eventually spiraled into deep performance anxiety, extreme stress, and that crippling insomnia. Moving on to part 3, we're looking at childhood trauma and scars, the invisible wounds. Because look, the pain wasn't just physical, right? To get what was really going on in his head, we have to rewind way back to his childhood in Gary, Indiana. His dad, Joseph Jackson, treated his kids way more like a business asset to keep their 10-person household afloat than, actual family. And his methods were brutal. Our sources note that Michael endured harsh physical abuse during those Jackson 5 practices. Joseph even forbade the kids from calling him dad. They had to call him by his first name. And worse, he relentlessly mocked Michael's physical appearance, specifically targeting his nose, telling him how ugly it was and insisting he didn't get it from the Jackson side of the family. You can imagine the terrifying, deep-rooted insecurity that kind of abuse creates in a kid. And that brings us to 1979. This is a massive turning point because it was the year of Michael's first rhinoplasty. Now, publicly, the PR spin was that he broke his nose in an accident and needed it fixed. But the underlying reality, according to our source analysis, was a desperate attempt to literally erase the facial features he had been mocked for by the father he was so deeply afraid of. It sparked this lifelong, tragic obsession with plastic surgery, continually trying to escape his own reflection. Next up, part 4, the Neverland Ranch allegations. From sanctuary to scandal. So trying to reclaim the childhood he was so violently denied, Michael builds Neverland Ranch. It was supposed to be this ultimate sanctuary, a place of pure, unadulterated innocence with its own zoo and amusement park. But as we all know, this sanctuary quickly turned into ground zero for the most devastating scandals of his career. In 1993, the first allegations hit from the Chandler family. This resulted in an intensely dehumanizing nude strip search by the police, something Michael later described as unbelievably degrading. That case ended in a $25 million settlement, but importantly, with absolutely zero proof of guilt. Then, in 2003, the Arvizo case blows up, heavily fueled by a highly deceptive documentary made by Martin Bashir, a journalist Michael actually thought was his friend. But the absolute key takeaway from the source material here is that despite the massive media circus and relentless police scrutiny, all of these child abuse allegations were ultimately proven completely false. Now add to those false allegations an absolute mountain of industry stress. He was getting trolled hard by the public, like when Eminem made a video mocking his traumatic hair fire incident, though I gotta say, Michael brilliantly fired back by just buying the rights to Eminem's publishing catalog. But he was also locked in a super bitter feud with Sony's Tommy Mottola, loudly accusing him of racial discrimination. And then of course the 2002 Berlin incident where he dangled his infant son over a hotel balcony for the fans. It was a massive lapse in judgment that brought down a tidal wave of backlash. All of this combined just pushed his paranoia to the absolute limit, forcing him into severe, lonely isolation. All right, part 5, fatal medical negligence, the anatomy of an error. Armed with all of that context about his broken body and his profound psychological trauma, let's look back at that final morning. This comparison right here, this is the core of the whole tragedy. It clinically exposes the unforgivable mistakes that were made. On the left is what Dr. Murray actually had in that bedroom: a basic oxygen cylinder, a bag valve mask, and some sedatives. But to safely administer propofol, you mandatorily need everything on the right: a target-controlled infusion pump, an ECG, a pulse oximeter, a continuous blood pressure monitor, and capnography equipment. None of these essential, literally life-saving machines were in that room. Administering surgical anesthesia without them is just a recipe for catastrophe. And it really gets worse. Beyond just missing the right equipment, Dr. Murray's actions in the heat of the moment were completely disastrous. He was flying blind, giving excessive propofol without monitoring a thing. When Michael stopped breathing, Murray failed to even figure out if it was a respiratory or a cardiac arrest. He wasted 10 precious minutes doing totally ineffective chest compressions on a soft mattress. And most chillingly of all, instead of immediately screaming for 911 to get advanced medical help, he's busy telling security to help him hide medical vials in bags to cover his tracks. Unbelievable. And for all of this, for this catastrophic sequence of errors, for giving a deadly anesthetic without monitors, and for actively hiding evidence while his patient was dying, Dr. Conrad Murray was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And his sentence? Just 4 years in prison. 4 years. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to really chew on. We've traced the physical accidents, the childhood abuse, the predatory media, the false allegations, and a doctor who was totally willing to bypass basic medical ethics for a paycheck. Looking at the whole picture, was Michael Jackson's death simply the tragic mistake of one negligent doctor? Or was it the inevitable collapse of a man who spent his entire life being failed by the very systems and people supposed to protect him? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep asking questions and keep looking at the facts. See you next time.